Good evening, YouTube. Welcome back to the channel. This is IMAX Sports with another football video, and today I'm going over my Week 16 NFL power rankings. These are my final power rankings. I went over a preliminary power rankings on Sunday night, but since there had been 4 games left to play, I didn't want to do commentary. I didn't want to do my final rankings yet because I figured there was way too much football left to be played. I usually make the power rankings before the last game had been played for the week, but I figured with 4 games left, it wasn't even worth doing the video yet. So this week probably has the most changes within the top 5 since like week 4. So really interesting week of football. Let's get right into it. First off, we have the dumpster fire. The dumpster fire, this is the first time that the bottom 4 has been different, probably since week 5 as well. We have the Jaguars, Jets, Texans, and the Bears have joined the dumpster fire. The Lions have been in the dumpster fire for a very long time, but with their 2 recent wins and playing very well against tough teams mostly the whole season, I decided to give them some credit this week after their very impressive win over Arizona. I have the Jaguars at 32 after losing this week to the Texans. Jets at 31, Texans at 30, and Bears at 29. The Bears have not impressed me at all in any facet of the game the entire season. I'm just going to put it simply. Although they have had more wins than the rest of these teams for the majority of the season, I just don't, they just don't have an offense. And although their defense is pretty decent and has won them a couple of games, you can't be a decent football team without an offense, and their offense just doesn't exist. The Texans just beat the Jaguars, and Davis Mills played a really good game of football this week. Zach Wilson also played a pretty decent game of football this week. So the Texans have moved up to 30. They were, I believe, 32 last week. But they played an impressive game over the Jaguars, and the Jaguars are just clearly looking like the worst team right now. In the bad category, we have the Giants, the Lions, the Panthers, and the Falcons. The Lions have finally moved up from the dumpster fire. I almost want to put them higher, honestly. They beat Arizona this week. They beat the Vikings a couple weeks ago. They tied with the Steelers a couple weeks ago. They're not really turning their season around because their season's over, but they're looking like they could potentially be okay next year. Arizona has lost to now both Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff in the last 2 weeks, so they lost to the entirety of that blockbuster trade. The Rams are currently looking to potentially take over in the division, and the Lions are looking to potentially lose the first pick of the NFL draft. The Panthers and Falcons have just kind of been hovering in no man's land for the majority of the season. Neither of them have looked very impressive at any given moment, and they've been kind of stuck in the bad category ever since Carolina lost more than a few games, and ever since Atlanta got shut out by Dallas and the Patriots. None of these teams have had any real impressive wins this season, other than the Lions this week. Both the Panthers and the Giants beat the Saints early on. The Panthers looked like they could have had potential when they started 3-0, but since they started 3-0, they've lost a vast majority of their games, and they do what the Panthers usually do, which is start off strong and then disappoint their fans utterly, completely. The next category is I really want to think that they're good. This is the Raiders and the Seahawks. And the Raiders probably should be above the Seahawks, especially after beating the Browns this week. But the Browns weren't starting Baker Mayfield. They were starting their, I believe, 3rd string quarterback now that Case Keenum is also injured. The Raiders just have not looked good since week 7. They got completely demolished by Kansas City twice. Most of the teams have been able to at least hold their own against the Chiefs, make them sweat a little bit. The Raiders didn't do that. The Raiders got blown out by 40 points twice. The Seahawks started off decent. They started off 2-3. Russell Wilson went out against the Rams. He was out for 3 weeks. They came back. They had to face Green Bay the week they came back. Russell Wilson not only had his first 3-game losing streak, but his only shutout in his career twice in the same week. really weird season for Seattle this year. This is the first season that Russell Wilson will finish with a losing record. After they lost today, it's official he will finish with a losing record. And although I really want to think that Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Lockett could have been able to figure it out at some point in time, they just haven't. They just haven't been able to. And so although both of these teams either looked impressive at the beginning of the season or look impressive on paper, and I really want to think that they're good, I really just can't right now. I just can't. I really can't. In the conversation, we have Washington, the Broncos, the Eagles, the Vikings, and the Browns. The Browns did suffer a little bit from their loss this week. I know it was a backup quarterback, but they lost to the Raiders, who really have not looked impressive again for a very long part of the season. They've won 2 of their last 7 games, one of them being against the Browns, the other being against the Cowboys on Thanksgiving, when the Cowboys were missing their top wide receivers. At 19, we have the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings have had a very up and down season. They started off very poorly. They slowly made their way into the playoff race, and they're now trying to fight and hold on to a playoff position. They're currently 7-7 after beating the Bears this week in a fairly one-sided divisional game. The Bears tried to make it close to the end, but they ended up winning by an 8-point margin. The Eagles and Washington are both in the NFC least. They are trying to claw their way into the 7th seed in the NFC. The Eagles and Vikings are both 7-7. So are the Broncos and the Browns. The Broncos and the Browns, on the other hand, started off strong and are falling down. The Eagles and the Vikings started off weak and are slowly working their way up the ladder. Washington is now 6-8 after their loss to the Eagles this week. Garrett Gilbert played a pretty decent game of football. It was only his 2nd career start. He played a game last year for Dallas. Almost beaten the 8-0 Steelers, but weren't able to get it done. And it's just, all of these teams have had very up and down seasons, whether they started off strong and have fallen or started off bad and have risen up. They've all had very up and down seasons, and all of them are currently looking to potentially secure a playoff spot. The Vikings and the Eagles obviously have better chances than Washington or the Broncos, and the Browns are kind of in the mix as well. If they had won this week, then they would have a really serious chance at 8-6. But losing this week to the Raiders, because their backup quarterback was in, really hurt their chances. The next category, I just don't even know. The only thing I know about these teams is that none of them look like serious contenders right now, but all of them look like they could potentially be serious contenders. The Steelers have won a lot of really impressive games. They've also lost some really terrible games, including tying with the Lions. The Titans started off this season very strong. They had a 6-game winning streak, bringing them to, I believe, 8-2, before currently falling to 9-5. They haven't had a very impressive second half of the season because Derrick Henry's been injured. They've needed to do a lot of changes to their offense. Although their running game is still pretty decent, they put up 270 yards against the Patriots defense. They haven't looked too impressive since Derrick Henry's been injured. And the question is whether or not Derrick Henry will come back. They are looking to get A.J. Brown back for next week's game, which would really help them out a lot because they've also been missing wide receivers like A.J. Brown and Julio Jones. But it's really hard to tell where they are right now as a team because they've had so many injuries. So I think that 15 is a pretty fair spot. They are going to make the playoffs. They're pretty much guaranteed to make the playoffs. They're almost guaranteed to win their division if they can win like one more game this season, because they have beaten the Colts twice, so they do have indefinite tiebreakers in their division. But they're just not looking like the same team they did at the beginning of the season, and if Derrick Henry doesn't come back, I don't see them going very far. At 16, we have the Dolphins, and at 17, we have the Saints. This is the tale of two teams. The Dolphins started off 1-7. The Saints started off 5-2. The Saints slowly worked their way from 5-2 to all the way down to 5-7. While both of these teams are now sitting at 7-7. So the Dolphins started off 1-7. They're on a 6-game winning streak. The Saints had a 5-game losing streak. And so now both of these teams have evened out. They're around 500 currently. And the Dolphins are looking slightly more impressive just simply because they have a longer winning streak. The Saints have a 2-game winning streak, but the Saints have had, much like Tennessee, a lot of injuries. So that being said, the Saints do look like they have a very strong team. They've had a lot of good wins. They beat Green Bay early on. They just shut out Tampa and Tom Brady, even though they were missing their top 2 wide receivers for the majority of the game. It was a very impressive showing by the Saints defense. The offense is still, again, what I have questions about. And although their defense is playing very strong football and they're a very aggressive team, I need to see a little bit more from their offense before I can move them up any further. And if they can win a few more games to finish off the season, then I think that they'll look like not only a 7 or 6 seed, but pretty decently strong contenders for a divisional matchup or a NFC championship contender. The NFC is very tight at the top with the Packers, the Rams, the Bucks, and the Cardinals. But Tampa and Arizona and the Rams have all, and the Packers, all those teams have shown games where they've looked potentially like there's blood in the water. So we'll see. The Dolphins, on the other hand, I don't think will be able to make the playoffs simply because of the schedule they have left and the overall poor tiebreakers that they have, but they still do have fighting chances, and they're currently looking to potentially try and get into the playoffs. The next category is the Moody Teenagers, and although I did order these 3 teams, I don't think that it was significant enough to even change their ranking. They're all number 11. All 3 of these teams are like just right on the cusp of being in the top 10. They've all had their moments of really great football. They've all had their moments of really terrible football. And the Ravens especially look like they could be a very strong team. Namely because 2 of their most recent losses, one of them being against the Steelers, one of them being against the Packers, were lost simply because John Harbaugh decided to go for a 2-point conversion and they weren't able to convert either of them. Their backup quarterback, Tyler Huntley, was playing this week against Green Bay and almost won. They almost came back. They went for a 2-point conversion because obviously you don't want to go into overtime against Aaron Rodgers. But seeing as it didn't work against the Steelers, I'm surprised they went for it again against the Packers. It was a strange coaching decision in my opinion, and it hasn't worked out either time. So that being said, they are currently out of the playoffs. If they had not gone for those and had won one or maybe both of those games, they would not only be in the playoffs, they'd be winning their division, potentially first in the AFC. The Bills started off strong and have slowly fallen a little bit. They're currently 8-6 after their win this week over the Giants? Don't quote me on that. I don't know. The Panthers. They played the Panthers. It was a pretty solid game. They thoroughly beat them. They play the Patriots next week. We'll see a game that isn't impeded by 30-mile-an-hour winds. It'll be in Foxborough. That'll really tell us a lot about where the Patriots and Bills currently stand. And the Bengals have had a very up-and-down season. They've been the leaders of their division at multiple different times of the season. They've won a lot of really strong games. They've lost a lot of really close games against good teams, and they've just lost some bad games. They can put up 40 or get put up 40 on by any team in the league, really indiscriminately, and they can beat anyone or lose to anyone at any given time. That's why this is the Moody Teenagers, because I really don't trust any of these teams to beat anyone, yet they really could beat anyone at any moment. Playoff favorites, we have the Chargers, the 49ers, and the Patriots. All 3 of these teams are currently favorites to make the playoffs. The Patriots are at 9-5. The 49ers and the Chargers are both at 8-6. The Niners especially are Niners and Patriots especially. Chargers a little less so because all of the AFC wildcards are 8-6 right now, but the Chargers' schedule left is fairly straightforward, and they should be able to finish 11-6. The Niners should be able to make the playoffs considering the NFC wildcard is not closed up, but they have a significantly better team than a lot of the other teams fighting for the spot, and they already have a game ahead of all the 7-7 teams and 2 games ahead of the 6-8 teams. The Patriots currently are leading their division, and they have a win over Buffalo already. If they win next week, they've almost guaranteed to clinch the division. If they lose next week, there's more of a question about whether or not the Patriots will be able to make the playoffs, but I'm hoping we will be able to. This week's loss to the Colts was pretty rough. The first half was disastrous, and although we looked decent in the second half, the Colts really just dominated that football game. The Colts are looking like one of the best teams in the NFL right now, and they just made the Patriots look like dog water. So a win against Buffalo next week will be really good for us, but I needed to bump the Patriots. I almost put the Patriots below the 49ers because they really are. The 49ers really are looking strong right now, but the 49ers did just lose to Seattle a couple weeks ago. So all of these teams have had really strong streaks within the season, but they've also had their streaks of looking really weak or incapable of doing a whole lot in the playoffs. The strong contenders are the Cardinals, the Cowboys, the Colts, and the Bucks. A lot of C names, and then Tampa. Cardinals have moved down to 7. Last week I made my prediction before the Cardinals-Rams game, so they were at number 1. So this game includes their loss to the Rams and their loss to the Lions, so they've jumped down quite a bit. The Cowboys are at 6 after their win this week. I believe they played the Giants, not the Bills. The Colts are at number 5 after their win against the Patriots this week, and the Bucks are at 4 after their loss this week, their shutout loss to the Saints. Tampa, the Colts, the Cardinals, and the Cowboys all have 10 wins. The Colts have 8. But the Colts are looking stronger than the Cardinals and the Cowboys right now. The Cowboys haven't beaten a team with a winning record since Week 6, and the team that they beat was the Patriots, who at the time were 2-4, and Mac Jones was still learning how to play in the NFL. The Cowboys, although they've played very consistent football against weak teams, they haven't had a lot of strong teams to play against, and so it's been very hard for me to move them up. They've kind of just been sitting at that number 5, 6, or 7 spot for a very long time because they haven't really done anything bad other than lose to the Raiders, and they haven't really done anything impressive either. The Cardinals have dropped a lot. I've thought that they were going to win the Super Bowl for a long time, but this week's game, especially after last week's offensive performance, really make me question whether or not they are serious contenders. And then Tampa, obviously, this was a fluke game. Tampa's a very strong team, but the question still remains whether or not their team is going to be consistent enough to win in the playoffs. It's obviously Tom Brady, and people say that every year, so I'm not going to question it right now. But if we do continue to see a downward trend, that might be a question. Colts at 5, though. I think a lot of people might disagree with this. I think that this is a very accurate assessment of where their team is right now. Recently, they've demolished the Bills. They've demolished the Patriots. They demolished the 49ers earlier in the season. All of this was during their rise. They were 1-4. Since they were 1-4, they have won 7 games, and they've lost 2. That being, in that streak, they've had a lot of really impressive wins against the 49ers, against the Patriots, and against the Bills. Their only loss, one of their only losses being to Tampa. Their other loss being to the Titans in a 3-point game when Derrick Henry was still playing. Jonathan Taylor has improved throughout the entirety of the season, and the Colts are the only team out of these 4 that are currently on an upward trend. The Bucks and the Cowboys are pretty stagnant. Cardinals are on a downward trend. The Colts are the one that are looking like the hot team right now. I think that they have a chance to potentially win the AFC. Not like in the standings, but win the AFC Championship game. They don't have a chance to win the AFC in the standings. Chiefs have 2 games on them, but they do have the potential to win the AFC Championship game. In the NFL's elite, we have the Packers, the Chiefs, and the Rams. The Rams have moved into that number 3 spot after Tampa got shut out. And that's because they've looked pretty consistent. They beat the Cardinals last week. They beat the Seahawks this week in a pretty close divisional matchup. They were able to secure the victory. The Seattle defense did look pretty solid against the Rams offense, which isn't something that we've seen a lot from them the past couple of seasons. But they beat Tampa earlier in the season. They just had that one little drought in the middle where I kind of discredited them a little bit too much. But they've proven that they're definitely worthy of a top 3 spot right now. The Chiefs are at number 2, and the Packers are at number 1. I don't think anyone would argue that the Packers and Chiefs are the top 2 teams in the league currently. The Chiefs were down bad against the Chargers last week on Thursday night, and then they were able to come back and secure a pretty solid win. And the Packers, again, played another very solid, very strategic, very well thought out game of football against the Ravens. They did almost blow it at the end, but the bad coaching decision by John Harbaugh secured them the win. These 3 teams are looking like the strongest teams in the league right now, and yeah, there's not really much else to be said. These are my rankings for this week. I did use a lot of comments from people on my previous video where I did the preview of the rankings to see where I'd put some of the finalized teams, and then I used the games from the last couple of nights to help me also finalize the rankings. So thank you guys for all of the help. Thank you guys for all the suggestions. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you guys all in the next one. Peace.